Arratsaldeon, eta eskerrik asko ekitaldi honetara etortzagatik. Hemen foro berezi hontan, erakusketaren kanpoan antolatu dugun espazio honetara. Eta niretzako plazer bada, gaur aurkeztea elkarrizketa hau, Adriana Knouf eta Mijoren artekoa. Eta, pixkat, giroa berotzeko, Adriana, erakusketan parte hartzen duen artista bada, eta berarekin elkarrizketa batzuk eduki genituen, bere interesei buruz, bere ikerketari buruz, hortik zebilen baita ere Karen Baraden inguruko interesa, eta hortik iritsi ginen Mijoren gainaino. Eta, horraxe, okorritu zitzaigun bien arteko elkarrizketa bat, eramangarria, interesgarria izango litzatekela, konpartitzen dituzten interes ezberdinengatik, bai filosofiaren ikuspuntutik, bai teoria kuantikoaren ikuspegitik, eta, batez ere baita ere pixkat elkarrunea zan gai hauen ingurua, teoria fizikan oinarritutuko teoria hauen inguruan, beraiek daukaten ikuspegi feminista, ez? Eta, nik uste dut pixkat hortik joango direla ariak, baina, ikus dezagun, konbertsazio oro beti da sorpresa bat, eta seguru gaude gauza interesgarriak aterako direla, eta, noski gero, ideia da pixkat foro bezala, guztiok ere parte hartzea, eta galderak, eta hau dinamizatzea. Mila esker bioi, bale? Thank you very much.
Vale. Azien gona, itzaldixe inglez izangora, bale, gexena. Baina, gauza batzuk ez eskerrak emotearren, ez? Oierrei eta anai antolakuntza lanetan ibiltzearren, itzultzaileai betire marroi bat, eta, asamblea trasmari boiu bai, ez? Horrenak zazelako. Eta Adriana jobio, meleotearren. Bale, orduan, azingona, bale? Bale. Teoria kuantikoa ikuspegi feministatik. Okay, so, while we were talking, I was thinking, like, what is the relationship between quantum physics and feminism? And I brought this picture because it's like a funny way of saying it, like, what's the relationship between all these guys and feminism? Of course, quantum physics is much more than this, and its origins, as Adriana explained me before, they don't come only from this place. But anyways, so to explore this relation, I'm going to be talking about epistemology principally. Normally when we talk about quantum physics, we talk about ontology and how it brought a huge change in the ontological paradigm respect to Newton's paradigm, where Newton's world was somehow like you have an objective world that can be known by the rational subject. Okay, so the quantum physics bring a change about the way of understanding this in epistemology, and in ontology they change the way that Newton theorized space and time. With Albert Einstein's relativity theory, this was somehow challenged and transformed. They transformed the understanding of this space. So, as I said, but I'm going to be focusing in epistemology because quantum physics has not only revolutionized the understanding of the physical world, but also has a deep impact in epistemology, theory of knowledge, and especially in comparison with Newtonian physics that I'll be explaining later. So, my intervention today will focus on how feminist philosophy, and specifically the work of Karen Baraden, has read and reread the quantum physics and Bohr's interpretation of it. So, so let's start. Okay, I'll try to be fast. So, to do so, I will first explain. I'll be reading a lot because English is not my first language and I'm so fucking nervous. So, it's all good. Okay, so I will be first explaining the Young's double-slit experiment, the classical quantum physics experiment, and then I will be explaining the Heisenberg's microscope experiment, and with those quantum physics classical experiments, I will be talking about the philosophical interpretation of that Karen Baraden makes, to finally focus on the consequences that this can generate for a feminist ontology, which is what I'll look at my estimate, which is what matters to us. So, no. Everything matters anyway.
Everything is matter.
Everything is matter, yeah. So, Okay, the double slit experiment. Adriana, I will ask you for help if I'm blanking here, because she did a great workshop before this where she explained all this stuff much better than I will do now. So, but anyway, we'll try this. Okay, so the double slit experiment was an experiment designed by Thomas Young in the beginnings of the 19th century. So he wanted to demonstrate the wave nature of light. All right, light wasn't behaving as a corpuscular being, like not as I imagine balls when I think of corpuscular beings. Okay, so light wasn't behaving as a ball, was behaving more as a wave. Okay, so so I'm going to explain the experiment now. So first, you got an electron shooting gun. Okay, you see the first part of the area. Then you have a board with a double slit on it. Okay, and then at the end you have a screen that measures the impact that the electrons produce in that screen. All right. So if light, it can be done with photons, with electrons. I'm gonna be speaking about only electrons. Okay, to make it easier, because I don't understand it perfectly also. If light, if electrons behave on a corpuscular way, like as if they were balls, yeah, when you shoot them through the double slit board, you will have a pattern that's something like this. You know, like you throw the balls and they cross. Some of them cross the slit, and others not, and you have a pattern like this. Okay, so what Young demonstrated somehow that it doesn't behave like that. It behaves like a wave. Okay, so this is another image. I put it in different perspectives to understand it better. All right, so it's not like if you were throwing balls to that double slit. It's like if you were throwing water. Okay, so it goes all together and it generates a pattern that is something like this. Okay, so what's the interesting thing here? That if you do the experiment this way, the pattern that comes out is a wavelength pattern. But if you want to observe when the electron passes the double speed and you put a measurement machine in there to get how it does that, it behaves as a corpuscular element. Okay, so do we get this? Okay, so what's interesting here that measuring changes the measured object, which is something that shouldn't be happening if you have an objective world and you just interpret it, or if you just rationally relation with it. Okay, so this is the first experiment I want to explain, and hope I did well, Adriana. You can correct me later. Right, okay, and the other experiment, it's the Heisenberg's microscope mental experiment. Okay, it was designed by Werner Heisenberg in 1927. So I will be reading some things in here because I want to try to be precise. Okay, so first of all, imagine that you have an extremely powerful microscope, okay, that you use to observe the exact position of an electron. Okay, because of this microscope is so powerful, when it tries to measure the position of an electron, it transfers some energy to that electron. So what happens that when you transfer the energy to the electron, you alter what they call the momentum, which is the trajectory and the speed of that electron. Okay, so let's do it with not such a powerful microscope, okay, to not transfer that energy and to see what's the momentum, the speed, and the trajectory of it. Okay, so what happens that when you use a lower energy microscope to watch that, you don't have the capacity to see where is it exactly. Like you can see the speed it is on, but you cannot see where is it exactly. Okay, so vale. So the dilemma posed by Heisenberg's microscope showed again that on an atomic scale, the act of observing directly affects to the state of the observed system. Okay, so there's why he formulates the uncertainty principle, which states that there is an insurmountable limit to the simultaneous precision where you can perceive or measure some physical properties. All right. So the idea is that you cannot measure at the same time the momentum, the speed, and the trajectory of an electron and of a particle, and the location. And as much you want to see where it is, you less know its speed. As much you want to see the speed, you less know where exactly. Okay, so this is when philosophy comes in. Okay, so and there's a dilemma between if this is an epistemological uncertainty or an ontological indeterminacy, and I'll explain this. Okay, the thing is that you will never know how an object was before you measure it, because to know how it is, you gotta measure it. But by measuring it, you change it. So. Okay, so this leads us into two ways of seeing the world. You know, like one that's like follows the Newtonian legacy. That was the one that Heisenberg somehow stands for. That you assume that objects exist, like there is an object with a specific momentum and speed and trajectory, but you are not able to measure it. So that's when it comes the epistemological uncertainty. You don't know. Or the other vision, which is that, that properties such as position and momentum cannot be assumed to exist until we observe them. Okay, so we understand these two ways. Okay, vale. This interpretation challenges the idea that these properties pre-exist independently and before the measurement. So these properties will be a co-constitution between the measuring apparatus, the physical effect, all that stuff. Okay. And here it comes Karen Barad to, and her interpretation of this stuff. So I love this picture. First, she reminds me of a lesbian Margaret's Apple Guy version. Karen Barad's interpretation of Bohr's physics, okay? So Karen Barad argues that the fundamental unity of reality is the phenomenon. And this is understood as inseparability between the observer and the observant, the measuring elements and the measured thing. Okay, so why? Because phenomena, in a performative way of understanding it, which is the one that Karen Barad proposes, phenomena are not observed. Phenomena participate in. There is no passive observant who simply records data. Rather, the act of observation itself is the one that contributes to the formation of the observed phenomenon. Okay, so the object and the measuring apparatus emerge simultaneously from the observed phenomenon, which is the whole picture somehow. Okay, so I'll be reading something and... So this ontological approach somehow is a revolutionary proposal within quantum physics because it challenges the idea that objects has fixed and independent properties. Okay, so what Barad proposes is that these properties and objects are only determined in the context of a specific phenomena of a specific measurement. So this position challenges Newtonian physics, Cartesian epistemology, and the traditional conceptions of knowledge that we inherited from modernity. Okay, why? Because measuring devices are not simply Kantian conceptual frameworks, okay, are physical arrangements that produce the concrete phenomena. Okay, not concrete phenomena in an anthropocentric way that like you make the world, but in a constitution between all of them, the phenomena it's produced, it emerges somehow. Okay, so I don't know if I'm taking too long. I hope not.
Plenty of time.
A couple of sentences and I'll leave it there. In contrast to the modern approach, what the performativity theory that Karen Barad develops, which is called the agential realism, rejects the idea that words represent pre-existing objects. Okay? Performative theory emphasizes that the world is not understood by the rationality, but it's made through actions, practices, and dynamic relationships. Karen Barad does not consider that this separation, inherent separation between these entities, but it doesn't seem to say that this separation is also a mere illusion and that everything is like a sort of magma. She says that the differentiation and the dynamic patterns of differentiation is that what makes the individuals emerge from this. So here, how do we understand matter here? Matter in here will be understood as an active element in constant transformation, generating and being generated by dynamic processes. So in this vision, time and space are not fixed scenarios like in Newtonian physics, but more something that emerged from these changing patterns of differences that matter in causal relationships construct. And the last thing about this, and I'll go and talk a bit about feminism. So Karen Barat develops the notion of interaction to talk about this, which is that the idea of interaction will bring us to think that there are two individuals, two different elements that interact with each other. In opposite, the interaction means that everything is tangled somehow in a really deep relationship, and that we can separate in this element also. Bowling hasta. So the idea of interaction says that there's no an individuality before the relationship, but that the relationship is the first, and then we individuate different elements in that relation. Okay, so, and now, and I'll be, okay. So, what does this bring to feminism? What's the relationship between this and feminism? Okay, so this helps us to the breaking down of different barriers that maybe in questions and answers we'll be working on that more deeply. Subject-object, organism-machine, animal-human, but also it's interesting to me to think about the sexual identity. So many of my friends that are in here have already heard me talking about this stuff, so again. This is the idea, no? What is my gender identity or what I am? Okay, this seems to be like a central question in feminist politics. So the answer that the straight regime offers in here is that you are what binary biology determines, you know, a man or a woman or a male or a female. Okay, somehow different people from the LGBT community have developed different strategies to answer to this biologization of our identity. What has been one of our answers? Okay, one of our answers has been that I am what I feel. I am. Okay. To me, this is really dangerous because we're trying to escape from one way of essentialism, the biological essentialism, but we are generating another kind of essentialism, a psychological essentialism that is, I am what I feel. Okay, so if we understand Karen Barat's interpretation of quantum physics, we can say that our identity is a co-constitution between lots of relationships and that emerge from there. So the question of who I am, what I am, it's not a really relevant question, but more in what relationship do I want to be in and what relationships do I want to generate myself. And this is an example that I always say, but when I'm in Donosti, I'm a butch lesbian, and everybody's fine with that. If I go to Madrid, they understand that butch lesbian are women, so I gotta say I'm trans. And when I visit my grandma, I'm her lovely baby. Okay, a beautiful girl, that's always been that. And so, I mean, I could be wondering, like, who I am between all the stuff. It's not a relevant question because you are what the relationship made out of you with a grade of agency because you are participating also in that co-constitution of the world. So, okay, because we are nothing per se. We are nothing on our own, okay? So we are not lesbians or women, or we are not anything like that. But what makes us lesbians somehow is rejecting the network of relationships that wants to womanize us in order to create others. And I think that Karen Barat's ontology, quantum physics approach, and all this stuff can bring us an ontological framework where this materialistic ontology supports to build a new way of doing politics. And I think this is it. Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mijo. Great. So you all just get set up here. And I'll set my slideshow from beginning. And let's just let it... Okay, cool. So, Kaisho, I'm sorry that's the only Basque I know. Or I learned thank you today, but I'm not going to try that right now. So thank you for that wonderful sort of overview of Yeah, epistemology, ontology from sort of a Karen Barad perspective, and thinking about this relationship to quantum mechanics. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about how I'm approaching this from the context of the work that I have in the exhibition here. So since not everyone has perhaps seen the work, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So the work is called Quanto Canto, and it is a 3.5 meter tall sculpture hanging from the ceiling, made out of sapele wood, copper, brass, and it has a whole sonic component to it as well. And I think I'm going to show you a little bit of a video that I made about this work that will give you a little bit of the ideas behind the project, which I will then go into in sort of my contribution here. And I see a few of you who are in my workshop earlier today. Sorry, you're going to see these videos and some images that I already showed earlier today. Okay, so I'll stop the video there. There's a longer video that you can see on the website that goes into a little bit more detail. So this is a project about quantum computers, and I have to say, I'm not a quantum physicist. I did a little bit of quantum physics when I was younger, but I'm an artist these days. So I'm approaching this very much as an amateur. But I'm approaching quantum computers in part for something that I'll talk about later that relates to some of the way that Donna Haraway thinks about approaching technology, which is that as, artists, as writers, as people interested in feminist technoscience, we need to engage with the technologies in some fashion in order to understand what we can do with those technologies, in order to understand how we might want to critique them. And so that's why or how we might want to use them too, because sometimes they can be useful for us. So that's one of the reasons why I'm interested in quantum computers. So this here is a quantum computer, if you've never seen one before. This is the type of quantum computer that IBM is creating. This is the inside of the quantum computer. It's kind of complicated. The actual quantum computer chip is actually just this little bit at the very bottom. It's maybe about this big. The rest of this is a whole bunch of machinery and everything to service the quantum computer chip, let's say. So basically, the quantum computer chips that IBM uses are based off of what are called transmon qubits. And it's not important to go into exactly what this is. The main thing to know is that these types of quantum computer chips are able to be built and designed using the same techniques that are used to make the computer chips for our laptops and phones and everything like this. So from a business perspective, it allows companies like IBM to use what it already has instead of developing a whole new process. So that's one of the reasons why they're interested in it from a business case. So these quantum computers function by basically having these very, very small units on them that we call qubits. So in a normal computer, we think about bits. In a quantum computer, we think about qubits. So it's a quantum bit. So this is sort of a microscope view, speaking about microscopes. This is a microscopic view of one of these quantum computer chips. And the smaller bits here are the qubits. And these little lines here, these curved lines, are basically like the communication between the qubit and the outside world. Okay? And that's going to become important in a moment, and I'll talk about that later. But basically, this whole sort of setup is what's called the quantum chandelier, because it hangs down. And it's about 3.5 meters long, or 3.5 meters tall, which is basically the size of my sculpture. So I was basing the sculpture design off of a lot of the sort of physical relationships of this in terms of the size, in terms of some of the shape. So there's very much a cross shape to the sculpture, which is mirroring some of these designs of the qubits. But the interesting thing about this machine is in order to engage with it in a quantum sense, we have to cool it down. And we have to cool it down to a temperature that's colder than outer space, literally. Because basically the quantum computer can't function unless it's that cold. So this whole apparatus is designed to keep this this small chip at the bottom that cold. Okay? So it basically is warm at the top, colder than outer space. Then there's a whole bunch of cables coming in to bring information into the quantum computer, take information out. That's what you see here. There's a lot of copper involved, which allows for different types of heat transfer. This gold material that you see is gold. It's gold-plated copper because that helps with heat transfer and so forth. So as you can imagine, this is quite computationally and energy expensive to run. You need a lot of materials in order to sort of keep it cold, to provide the energy to keep it cold, and so forth. So this is the gory inside of the quantum computer. But this is what IBM wants to sell, right? This is sort of the representation of the quantum computers in terms of their marketing. And I want to show two different ways in which they have been marketing their computers. This is the IBM Quantum System 1, which they put out like in 2019 or so. And this was the marketing video for that. so that is a rave anthem. They're trying to create a particular image here for the quantum computers, right? One that is very clean, one that is going to solve all sorts of problems for us, one that is going to revolutionize things, right? And that was their first system that they offered on a commercial scale. Their second one, which I think is the one that's coming to Donosti, I think that's what we discovered today, is IBM Quantum System 2. And so I'm going to just show you a little bit of their marketing video for this one. This is from 2023.
Introducing the IBM Quantum System 2, the world's first modular utility-scale quantum computer system. Quantum System 2 was designed to tackle complex problems that lie far beyond the reach of today's classical supercomputers. It stands 15 feet tall and operates in a near-perfect vacuum at temperatures cold in deep space. Initially powered by 3
Okay, I'm going to pause that there. It basically goes on. If you can see, it's very much a similar sort of setup, very clean, very designed, huge amount of industrial design going into this in order to sort of create a particular image of the computer, right? All of the messiness that's going on behind the scenes is hidden from this, right? And so again, these are some of their promotional imagery, and I'm focusing on this because I think it's important to understand how do organizations market a technology that most of us don't use yet, that they are trying to sort of create an environment for us to get to use, right? And so this is sort of the ways in which they do it, And as of today, a lot of the rhetoric around quantum computing is that it's going to revolutionize things, it's going to change things, but the results aren't there yet, okay? And they're not there yet because we are in what's called the noisy intermediate scale quantum era. This is a term by a well-known quantum computing physicist by the name of John Preskill. And this is from 2018, but we are still in sort of this era, according to lots of quantum computing researchers. And so what does this mean? We are dealing with noise here. The fact that quantum computers need to be so cold is because you have to sort of settle everything down. Okay, so everything is moving in the universe because of heat. And if you remove that heat, things become very, very sort of not moving, let's say stable, and you can set up these very particular quantum situations that are needed for a quantum computer to function. And so in this sense, there are lots of different types of noises going on here in terms of the quantum noise, just the ways in which sort of the noise of the universe, basically, literally, is affecting the computer. There's noise in terms of how we get data in and out of the system. In my case, in my installation, there's sonic noise. All of these things mean that the data that we get back from the quantum computer is not going to be quote-unquote perfect. Okay, and the people that were in my workshop earlier today discovered this. So we did different types of computations on the quantum computers, and we all got a different result. Okay, there's no sort of perfection here. Everything is happening because interaction. The quantum computer is coupled to the environment, and thus you can never sort of get a perfect result from that. And so that's what I'm really interested in, sort of from an artistic perspective, let's say, is how this noise is functioning within the quantum computers and how we can maybe do something with this. And I go back to this sort of diagram here, or image, photograph actually, this is actually a photograph, microscopic photograph, of these qubits in the system. And all of these curved lines are basically how you get information in and out of the system. And you do that based off of basically the idea of resonance. And you put some energy in there, it vibrates at a certain frequency and resonates at a certain frequency, and that's how you change the quantum state. And so in most quantum systems these days, we're only thinking about changing to one or two states, okay? So we are basically mirroring what we have in our computers right now, which we have a 0 and a 1. In a quantum computer, we have a 0 and a 1, right? It's a slightly different type of 0 and 1, but it's still a 0 and a 1. Turns out that in quantum computers, you can actually get to higher energy states. So rather than a 0, 1, we could have a 0, 1, and 2. We could have a 0, 1, 2, or 3. And so we could have a completely different way of thinking about computation, okay? So we would not have to just think even in terms of a quantum binary sense. We could think about it in a quantum tertiary sense or a quantum quadruple sense or whatever it would be. So we could have 4 levels of computation. And so, what happens is when you get data from the quantum computers, you're basically trying to classify that data, whether it's going to be a 0 or a 1 in the end. And so, the image on the left is sort of the way that most quantum computers work these days. You get these 2 separate blobs here. The one on the right is if you have 3 different levels, so 0, 1, or 2. Okay, it's a little bit more messy, but you could still do it. You have a bunch of noise. And I'm very curious about why we decide not to try and explore the part on the right, right? That could be a very different way of thinking about computing. We could potentially get out of this whole binary way of thinking, right? We could move to another way of thinking. And so I'm interested in exploring these things, and I've been doing that a little bit in my own work. I've been also doing things, I'm not going to go into the full details of this, but looking at how you might want to entangle 127 qubits together. Basically, you can do that. And again, this is just some graph from some of my work that I've done. In an ideal world, I should only have a line that goes from 1 all the way across. But this is the noise of the quantum system here. So basically, the quantum system is giving me mostly the wrong answer all of the time. And I use that as some of the input into the artwork that's in the exhibition here. And so I'm really interested in this because quantum computing researchers, commercial researchers are trying to get rid of this noise. And I think this is where the interesting part is. I want to think about what is a noisy computing. Can we finally understand and accept that the world is noisy, that the world is not binary, that the world has all sorts of possibilities to it, and can we make our computing represent that, And so I want to finish up here with 2 different quotes that really sort of describe the way in which I'm relating to this. And so it's funny, I was teaching with my students this week Donna Haraway's well-known Cyborg Manifesto from 1985. Turns out she actually talks about quantum mechanics in there in the beginning, just a very small bit. So that was an interesting thing. But I really, really relate to this quote of hers at the end of the text, which is, cyborg politics is the struggle for language and the struggle against perfect communication, against the one code that translates all meaning perfectly, the central dogma of phallogocentrism. That is why cyborg politics insists on noise, one of the reasons why I'm interested in noise, and advocate pollution, rejoicing in the illegitimate fusions of animal and machine. So thinking about where can we engage with these systems to push the noise and see where we can play around with this. And that's also why I'm interested in engaging with these machines, even if I can critique them a lot, but I want to engage with them to figure out where can we play with this noise. And to find 2 more things, and then we'll get to sort of our conversation here. Thinking about Karen Barad, Meeting the Universe Halfway, her book on these things, I wanted to point to the other part of the phenomena, which is the apparatus, okay? And for Karen Barad, the apparatus is sort of the constellation of everything that goes into creating a measurement. And in her case, the measurement is a physics measurement. In our case, it's a measurement of how we decide gender, how we decide names, language, all these sorts of things. So Barad writes, there is something fundamental about the nature of measurement interactions such that given a particular measuring apparatus, certain properties become determinate while others are specifically excluded. Which properties become determinate is not governed by the desires or will of the experimenter, but rather by the specificity of the experimental apparatus. And so what this means for me is that how we decide to arrange things in the world, how we decide to do certain types of measurements, will determine what we get. So we need to think about how we do these things differently. And I want to finish up with a recommendation for a book here by a historian by the name of David Kaiser, How the Hippies Saved Physics. Basically, Kaiser did a whole bunch of historical research, and back in the 1970s, this idea of quantum entanglements, all these weird sort of spooky action at a distance, all of this stuff that we associate with quantum was not really accepted by, or it was not even really proven within the scientific establishment. And in fact, most scientists didn't even want to touch that. They were like, this is too weird. We're not going to deal with it. There were some hippie quantum physicists at the time who were interested in things like parapsychology, alternative mental states. They were doing LSD, all of this sort of stuff. But they also did the experiments that ended up proving that quantum entanglement existed. Okay? And so for me, this says, okay, how you decide your apparatus and the ways in which you see the world is going to help determine what you see in the world. So because they had this very, very different way of looking at the world, they decided, no, we are going to do the experiments to try and prove this weird thing that we know exists. And it was only because they had a different outlook on the world that we now have something that we accept to be quantum entanglement and other things like that. And so I do think, that for me, that's an interesting point to say this is where we can begin to maybe think about how we need to change the ways in which we do science and technology and so forth to create new things in the world. So I'll finish up there. Thanks. All right. So, I guess we have time for conversation for a bit, and then we can open it up to some questions.
Yeah, we have some questions prepared.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So.
Okay, so, well, as it is in English, I've wrote the homework, my PhD directors in here will know that I will never do, I wrote everything prepared and so neat and that stuff, so.
I'm looking at my phone to find the questions
okay.
that we wrote up.
So, what do you think, Adriana? I'll ask you a question.
We can go back and forth.
Oh, okay. So the first question we thought was that why is it important to rethink our approaches to matter?
Yeah.
And so, you go first.
I go first.
If you wanna.
Sure. I mean, I think, how we understand matter really is sort of our ontological way of seeing the world, right? And I mean, we were having a bit of a conversation earlier about different types of knowledges in the world. We didn't even talk about any sorts of indigenous knowledges in the world that also relate to these sorts of things, and it's not my place to say those things. But I think how we decide to choose what we consider importance within sort of our material understanding of the world, will help shape and determine, as Barad says, what we see in the world, right?
My. No, I was actually it's the same answer, but formulated in a different way.
Well, but to me, the importance of rethinking the matter, rethinking those new ontologies somehow, and creating something different is that we need to somehow be able to develop a feminist science in the sense Donna Haraway somehow prophetized. Not only her, she's not anyway. So I understand that modernity has sedimented certain dichotomies such as modern ideas, nature, culture, body, mind, those kinds of dichotomies. So, for example, Latour affirmed that we need a new metaphysics or a new cosmology to somehow escape from these dichotomies. So I understand that rethinking our approaches to matter is a way to doing this. In the sense of Adorno and Horkheimer said, the idea that the Enlightenment was somehow the disenchantment of the world to create a dead matter that you can dominate later. So somehow revitalizing this matter or re-enchanting this matter somehow can give us an ontological framework where this domain is not practiced, or not at least in the modern way of it. I was just wanting to add something to that, which came up in my mind during your presentation. So just to add another idea to this, there's, within sort of science and technology studies, there's this idea of ontological politics. So by these researchers, Anne-Marie Mol, who's based in the Netherlands, and John Law, based in England. And the name is, as it says, ontological politics, right? Which is this idea that there's a political choice in deciding what types of ontological things you want to exist, right? And so if we decide that it's important to have a quantum computer, if we decide it's important to have AI of a certain type, if we decide it's important to have universal basic income or things like this, right? There's that determines how we see the world, right? And so those are political choices. It's not like we're referencing some ontological realm that's separate.
And also that we'll be talking later about this, but not in a way that the human creates its world.
Yeah.
Like not in the world that I choose my ontology, then I choose my world and I make it, but in that co-constitution of the difference where, I mean, I can choose that that the wall is transpassable. I can pass the wall, but I'm gonna hit in my face if I do that because it's not just like if I change the framework, everything changed. No, it's. The ontological politics are not an anthropocentrist proposal, but more a deep entangle between those biotic, non-biotic agents where life, matter, and those things happen.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think about it as matter pushes back. Exactly. Matter is very recalcitrant. Like, I can't go through the wall as much as I want to. I mean, maybe I can learn that. Maybe that's something we can learn as humans. But I can't do that right now. You can't do that right now.
And that was, I had this prepared for the second question, but if you want, I'll go
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So the idea of the decentering the human or changing the focus on that, I think that this is, this ontology somehow, this ways of thinking materiality, it's one of the most interesting implications to me of this, because if we get the human out of the center of everything, we can be thinking about relationships and our policies in a different way. And I was thinking about in the animalization or in those politics, one of the first splits that modernity creates is between the human and the non-human ones. So that creates the first animalization, that or everything that's not a Homo sapiens. I understand that in the modernity they didn't call us Homo sapiens and the other, but I'm gonna call it this way. Was some kind of a lower level, an intrinsic division between all of this, and then you use this lower level you created to dehumanize every element that you need. For example, the first example of it is the racialized people. That the first one that are wondered if are they humans or are they animals, and often animalized, and through different policies, we see it here at Donosti or in Tabakalera. The other animalization is somehow the woman, no? Like you have the man that's culture, reason, that stuff, and the woman that's body, emotions, and all that stuff. So all these dehumanizing activities will be a way of justifying the later colonization and patriarchy, all that stuff. So we cannot change this without decentering the human being from being the center of epistemology, the center of ontology. And I think that somehow new materialism bring this into the conversation somehow, like how these new ways of thinking matter brings a new way of thinking the human being and its relationship with its environment and that stuff. Because these barriers that of older comprehension of matter, of a different, older comprehension of matter, didn't serve us to understand the world we're living in, or not on our political ontology.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think one example that I've been thinking about this is. So I'm from the U.S. I live in the Netherlands right now. If you haven't noticed, there's some things going on in the U.S. these days. And one of the things that's happening is a choice to measure biological sex, right? Which doesn't exist, but it's a choice to see the world in a particular way, right? Which then marks trans bodies in a particular way, right? That removes them from certain protections and so forth, right? So a choice to measure something is a choice also to create a particular type of politics and so forth. Should we open it for questions, or I forget, because we have a...
Half-life, like 10 minutes.
Yeah, so maybe we... shall we open it to questions?
Right.
If people have any questions? And if not, because we could talk forever, as we learned. But I want to make sure that there's some opportunity.
Only one last thing, okay? I'll say it fast, sorry.
Yeah.
Because, I read it, so
ahead.
I'm going to read it now. The other questions we had in mind was why is it important to think about the matter in a feminist view? And I want to say something about this. To me, it has been really important because I was so against science. Science was a male stuff. Science was, a way of they have object, make us an object and that stuff. And there was different things. Some had to deal with meeting Aranta and her biologist group, forgotten female bodies and that stuff. That made me think that. Feminists have also have to be in science. We have also have to be in these different areas, and that's important to me. And because of you talk about the VM computer, I have this silly thing here. But why do we have to be in science, in matter, and all these questions? I think that the most important thing is because if we are not in there, others will be. Mm-hmm. And with that, others will be, the usual suspects. Because what's going on with this, the Quantum Basque Center and the IBM computer and all this stuff? How do we make these technologies to work for the welfare of the city and not for, the economical interests of the people who always get their economical interests satisfied in here? So I understand that feminists that defend public services should have a part in all of this. Because if not, we are financing with public money, public-private collaboration, money, a little toy for the richest of the city that will play with it, I don't know which way. And I want to appeal institutions in here because we need power to decide. We need to democratize this all high-tech projects, all this stuff. Because, as I said, if we don't do that, others will be using it, and we're going to be damaged by it, and not only the feminists, but everyone. And the last thing to say in here that's important to me, sorry, Adriana, it was let's make a conversation. And I'm I've wrote all my questions. So I'll try to be fast, okay? I'll take it later. So this is important to me because I think that public institutions have to do something about this. We cannot leave this to individuals, and we were talking loads of us, for example, are trying to change our high-tech corporation devices, softwares, that stuff, free software and all that stuff, individually. And that's important to me. But if the public institutions don't do anything about this, for example, the Basque University where I study, work, makes us to have a Microsoft account for the mailing system. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what's the point about some individuals changing that while the public institutions are giving all these high-tech resources to private companies that are not really concerned about our welfare? Mm-hmm. So that's another thing. And the last thing, sorry, but I'll finish with this. And the last example that I wanted to bring about thinking matter, and as I told you, is because another example can be found in my other PhD director's work, Julio Goicoechea's 13th thesis for Marxism and feminism, which is interesting to me to rethink the matter on different ways, many different ways, in a physical way, political way, that stuff, because there's a dissociation between what's called material struggles and cultural struggles. Somehow the left-wing male wants to tell us wants to remind us actually that while we're preoccupied by frills, such as representation, ideas, change of consciousness, and they are worried about the fighting for bread. The real things matter. Okay, so their fight is a material fight, and our fight is a cultural fight, some kind of thing like that. So I understand that a new conception of matter is necessary to break this way of understanding this dissociation on politics, and to understand that, to remind them that racialized people, LGTB, women, animals are not cultural elements, but material semiotic political bodies that are produced by different regimes of oppression that are also material. And just to finish with some examples, it's the spoliation of the global south not material? Is it like my butt nearly not keeping into the seat not material? Or why are all the toilets in the world clean? Mm-hmm. That's because a woman working on music and not material, and we cannot put this forward in a century 17 conception of matter. Does that not serve us? Yep. So that's, I'm sorry, Adriana, but I have it written, so
Yeah.
I was going to say.
I'm glad. Go for it. Go for it.
Bye. And now.
Awesome.
Bye.
So, we could even have a small conversation here if anyone wants to join in.
Galderarik badago?
I mean, we set this up in a very material sort of way too. We're up here, you're out there. We could have had it in a circle.
Badakit itzultzaileak materialki agotatuta nekatuta egongo dela, baina bueno, oraindik uste dut pixkat jarraitu dezakegula, osea que galderak egitera animatzen zaituztet. ¿Alguna pregunta?
This tends to happen in the Basque Country, like the first row is empty,
Yeah.
and no one makes questions. It tends to happen here.
Happens everywhere I've been. Oyer, do you have a question?
Actually not, but
No?
I don't know. I always can speak. No, I don't know. I was. I like very much your recommendation, the book. I didn't read it, but I remember another book. I don't know. I don't remember the author, but is I mean, I think it's the same period. It's like from counterculture to cybernetics.
From
no?
counterculture to cyberculture.
I think it's like all the same research area, no? And okay, it's interesting, no, to see how things happens, but also, no, how the capitalism finally, no, absorb everything, all this experience, all this knowledge, all these ideas of change the world, no, and became Silicon Valley, no. So,
Exactly.
yeah, it's like. Maybe sometimes I see very good book, but maybe too American. Also,
Yes,
focus
it was very
on
American.
everything. No, like Mijo says, no, all the innovation, all the science only happens in America. No, this is also a problem, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what to ask. Maybe someone has more interesting questions.
Well, maybe just on that point. So the book that Oya is referring to is called From Counterculture to Cyberculture by the historian Fred Turner. And so, yeah, it goes through all of these details, basically of how we got from, again, in the American context, how we got from most people on the left, quote unquote, considered very broadly, hating computers in the 1960s, loving them in the mid-70s to late 1970s, developing these companies that you might have heard of called Apple and Microsoft and so forth. And then today, well, you see where we're at. Right? And sort of he talked about how that's very much connected to a particular American strand of libertarianism and so forth. But there are some other books that I have seen that are about like Soviet computing at the time, Soviet cybernetics. And I mean, there's more of these histories being written because obviously there's a lot of computing going on in the world other than in the US. And so thinking about how to break that U.S. hegemony. And again, this goes back to what you were talking about, like needing to sign up for a Microsoft account or something like this. Why don't we have a European option for these things, right? I was just reading recently that the French government has put together their own online version of like a Google Docs, right? So that Europe can have its own sort of separate thing that's completely separate from the U.S., right? Obviously, there's hegemonic concerns there and imperialist things, et cetera, But I mean, I think thinking about how can we engage with this stuff in a way that provides some values that we might believe in, whether that's French values, whether that's Basque values, whether that's a small feminist collective's values, right? How can we create technology that's embedded within that, I think is really important these days.
Just to add something stupid, not only European, also public, because I don't trust in European companies.
No, exactly. So how can we make these things truly public?
And Adriana, can I ask you a question? Because no one does.
Sure.
So I was seeing the Teleberri, that's the Basque government public television news moment, and they're like, the IBM computers here, the IBM computers here. And to me, the funniest thing is, I don't really know what can be this used for, but as I saw Nobody really knows. Like you had like a Basque government worker in the news saying something like, "Yeah, it will change traffic maybe." Really mean it. I mean, see the teleberry. O sea, see that. So it's so funny to me. So what there do you see potential?
Yeah. So as we were talking about a little bit in my workshop earlier today, right? These quantum computers right now are basically research devices. Okay, there's not a lot that you can do on them that is better than one of these things, or better than like a machine that's in another room or something like that, right? There's attempts to do this, but we're not there yet. And it's partially due to noise. These machines are very much, affected by this, and so we don't get the results that are needed to make the quantum computer better. So, yeah, it's a research device. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have much public use right now. And so, fine, describe it as a research device, but it's not something that will solve any practical problems at the moment. And, I'm not Basque, so I'm not going to, have any claims about its importance or anything to the area or something like that, but that is something that lots of regions around the world, whether it's regions or universities in the US, buy one of these machines in order to place themselves within a particular network of power, let's say, right? And that's a political strategy. That's a political decision, and so forth, right? And so that's also part of the calculus of these machines. Like all machines, like all computers, it always has a political side to it, in terms of, how it relates to society. It is interaction all the way down. Anything else? Or shall we finish?
We can continue in the bar.
Yeah, we can do that. Awesome.
Thank you very much, Mijo. Thank you very much, Adriana. Really, really nice to hear.
Thank you.
both of you.
People also.